realize that when I moved into the president's house, and I was the second occupant, our government was in Philadelphia a good 10 years during the 1790s while we were building our new capital along the banks of the Potomac. So we moved into Washington City, November of 1800, and Mr. and Mrs. Adams were the first occupants. And when I came in the following March, the end of March 1801, I found that the outdoor privies, and there were 2 of them. So no matter what office you held or what ambassadors came to visit, or anyone in government, that is where you would attend. I thought they were unsightly. So I had them demolished, and I built the first indoor privies in the president's house. 2 of them, one at each end, and I built the first indoor privies of any mansion house in our nation at Monticello. And so here there is actually a privy being built, though it's on that side of the house and it's just not finished yet. So I apologize for that, but it's progress. And when the Federalists say I never accomplished anything during my 8 years, you can imagine that I look at that as an addition. But I want these few moments that we're still together before you set out. And coincidentally, has anyone been in the least bit chilled?
No.
You know, we've had the front door open the entire time.
Love it.
The front door open, and the breezes have just come in and out here. So I'm very proud of being able to accomplish that, indoor climatize. Would anyone have a question or a curiosity that's been on your mind for any length of time? This is your time, and there's no such thing as an unworthy question. So whatever's on your mind, I'm more than happy to take it now as we finish the last sips of wine and our last moments of gathering. Yes.
I can't remember, how old were you when you were president?
I was, well, you know, when you begin that question, I have to tell you, not to complicate it, but I was born on the 2nd of April, 1743, though 9 years later, I began to celebrate my birthday on the 13th of April. I thought I'd throw that in there just as a bit of curiosity. Anyone know the reason why? No. I think the gentleman does. Exactly. I was born during the Julian calendar. Great Britain was still using the calendar commissioned by Julius Caesar, even though in the mid-16th century, Pope Gregory XIII, realizing that Julius Caesar's calendar was off by 11 days, and the first of the year was always celebrated in the vernal equinox, spring, the beginning of the resuscitation of life, makes the sense. So Pope Gregory brought together the advance in astronomy and mathematics, recalculated the solar year, came up with the Gregorian calendar, moved the first day of the year to the darkest days of the year to be associated with the birth of Jesus, symbolizing the hope as we accrue more light, moving into more light in the year. So in 1752, Great Britain finally got around to adopting the Catholic calendar. Exactly. And do you know that was not without riots in London by people who didn't want to lose 11 days. So that is how that started. But in any respect, born in 43, I was inaugurated, took the oath of office on March 4th, 1801. So I was not yet 57 years old. And I turned the gavel over to Mr. Madison on the 4th of March, 1809, not yet 65 years of age. So that's when and I never use the word retirement in my vocabulary, because we were talking about spending my autumn years building a true university of Virginia. So that's what I am doing. Other question?
How often do you have these dinners for guests?
Here? We actually have these several times during the year. Now, you all are indeed, we are happy that you all have taken time to be here during what is usually our wine festival. We have the wine festival every year during this weekend. And so unfortunately we could not gather this year, and as a consequence, deciding to float this to see if anyone would be interested, rather than several hundreds of people, for you all to be able to have the entire house to yourself indoors, because we do not venture through the house during the wine festivals. We're outdoors all on that area. And then we're looking at a dinner in December. We always have a wine dinner in
Already
mid-December.
booked out.
So we're looking at that.
We tried, it's already booked.
You tried? It's booked.
You can put a
We
good word
just,
for us.
we just tried. Do you know anyone who can pull some strings?
Now you have to talk to the overseers.
Don't you own this joint?
Me and TJ were like this.
I don't want to refer to myself as entirely absentee, but I am for the most part. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Being that you supported small government in your days, more so than you agreed that states govern more so themselves than, as far as, when we declared our declaration and we were overseen by a big government, you believe, right, in small government, more so smaller government. Would you say that was correct, or?
Well, many have asked me about this, and of course I have to remind them when we began as a nation, we had 13 states and commonwealths.
Mm-hmm.
We actually achieved something that England never ever wanted to have happen in order to create a federal system. Anyone know what I'm referring to?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we brought together 13 individual nations. Remember, all of those former colonies were distant, disparate, one from the other, in the degree of religious opinion in one versus a vast difference in the other, in the degree of freeholders living in one versus the greater number of tenants living in the other. And remember, there was slavery in every single one of them.
Yeah.
And we brought it all together, e pluribus unum. It makes you wonder, how did we do that? Well, we did that not only for the common safety and defense, but for the common good through compromise. Compromise and resolution on behalf of the common good. So, that had to be tested with the war. See, we did that before we ever went to war with England.
Yeah.
Before I ever wrote the Declaration, which happened after we were at war with England. So after our victory, we have been held together through what were called Articles of Confederation. Now, it did not have an efficient method of providing the general taxation for safety and defense. It just didn't have an efficient method. It did not have an efficient method of electing the chief magistrate, the president. In fact, there was no president of the nation. There were presidents of the Congress, and there were many of them. So I was not here when they held the Constitutional Convention. I was in France. And during that September of 1787, then we strengthened the federal system for the greater efficiency of taxation for our defense, the greater defense then of all of the states, as well as the federal government to administer that defense to the states. And then we created a more efficient method of electing the president of these states united. Almost immediately after that, what did we find? We welcomed, if you will, our 14th state and 15th state, Kentucky and Tennessee. And then we welcomed Vermont, which had been warred over between New York and New Hampshire. Came in 91. Mr. Madison and I made a trip to the Northern Lakes just to learn the political sentiments of Vermonters. And then when I was president, we welcomed the 17th state being carved out of the Northwest Territories, Ohio. Then another 9 years later, in 1812, we welcomed Louisiana. Then a few years after that, we welcomed Indiana. Just a year or two after that, we welcomed Mississippi. A year after that, we welcomed Illinois. Then we welcomed Alabama. So before 1820, when we had a real contest as to whether we admit Maine free and Missouri enslaved, we would then have 24 states. So when people say your government's growing, it certainly is. We're going to have 24 states, so there is going to be a larger government. And it's up to that federal government to oversee that safety and defense and the opportunity for people to settle and stake their claim. So to say that I'm in favor of first of all, to say that I believe in the rights of individual states, yes, to check the power of the federal government, but I've never been opposed to the federal government.
Never opposed.
Not like Patrick Henry was. He certainly was. He feared it. But I said it's necessary for the states to be protected and defended. So each state has the right to provide their taxation as they choose on the real estate. And naturally that's going to be different in New York or Massachusetts than it's going to be in Virginia or now in the territory of Missouri or far up northeast in Maine. So you see, to look at something as a definitive in that, it's very, very difficult to do at no matter what time.
Well, speaking of definitive, the Constitution, the words that were written are so timeless and a blanket across technology that we have today and social media, even back then when none of those things were present. I find the words that they used were so timeless is the best word I can. What makes it timeless?
But I'm going to tell you, no, I've actually written on this. You know, when we talk about this, and people might shake their finger and say, "Now, Mr. Jefferson, you're wrong." I say, "No, I'm not. That's what I wrote." I mean, what more am I going to say, right? In that respect. But as I mentioned, I was in France during the Constitutional Convention. I thought the Articles of Confederation I mentioned were a venerable fabric. But I kept in correspondence with Mr. Madison, the most luminous mind I've ever known. And the mighty Madison sent me the first draft of the Constitution as might be ratified. And I wrote back to him, I am captivated by this. It is the shortest document of its kind in human history, creating a government to check its own power. And of the three branches, which is the most influential branch? The legislative body, absolutely right. That branch that supports the very first line in our Constitution, which is the most incredible first line written in any system of government in human history. Well, how does it begin? We the people. Extraordinary. Because that is what gives the power of our Constitution to grow as we grow as a people. As I've written, you might expect a child of 14 to wear the same clothes at the age of 40. Our laws and institutions grow as we grow, as the people, which is really the essence of English common law, which we have adopted as far as the foundation of our Constitution and jurisprudence. It evolves. It grows with the experience of every successive generation. So that first line, and then you talk about technology. I've heard that word. I call it the art of scientific investigation. It's a new word for me, technology. But do you know that we are the first people in human history to insert in our Constitution, in our system of government? It's one of the duties of the legislative body. Anyone know what I'm talking about that applies to what you just said and what I answered? Well, patents fall under that, I know, because I held that department, as you know. But relative to patents that enable our people to pursue it, the pursuit of science. I say no more, it's in our Constitution. And the very first collegiate curriculum devoted to that pursuit, in fact, the very first school of engineering in our nation, I had the privilege to commission at West Point, 1802. Establishing the first school of engineering ever before I was able to begin our university here in Virginia. In fact, I will tell you what is interesting. I appointed, of course, the first commandant. He was a major at the time, Jonathan Williams. And he was the great-nephew of Benjamin Franklin. And he accompanied Dr. Franklin to Paris very early on as one of his secretaries. And then when he returned to our nation, he became very wealthy in real estate in Philadelphia and wrote the first formal scientific treatise on building fortifications. And he had seen many of the forts throughout the ancient kingdoms of Europe, particularly Chateau d'If in the harbor of Marseille. So because of the influence of his work on fortifications, I appointed him the first commandant of West Point, devoted to defense and fortifications. Do you know within 2 years, there was an uprising amongst the professors at West Point who did not like the fact that the library at West Point was continually being shelved with the newest works on scientific progress. They could not keep up. They could not keep up. And so General Williams wrote me, and what am I to do? And I say, please stand sentinel, because this is the only curriculum where we are pursuing this. It's necessary for our nation's defense. He later resigned because of that. What do you call it? The pressure put on him by the professors there was a bit too great for him.
Wow.
And then we had Partridge, Alden Partridge, from Connecticut, with whom I have recently corresponded as to ascertaining the heights of the tallest mountains in North America. He surveyed, do you know this? He surveyed the heights of the White Mountains up in New Hampshire and decided that at 4,200 feet, they are the tallest in America. So that prompted me to go over here to the Peaks of Otter and to scale the Peaks of Otter twice and discover that both peaks, if you take the average, are 4,300 feet. So I'd like to say that those are the highest mountains in North America. Now, I'm not going to tell you what Colonel Zebulon Pike told me, but when he returned from his expedition to discover the confluences of waterways in the southwest regions of the Louisiana Territory, he said he came across a peak out west in the Stony Mountains, which are now being referred to as the Rockies. He calculates, and he did not have his theodolite to ascertain. He says it could be about 14,000 feet. Can you imagine such astounding and preposterous dreams? So it is in that regard. Well, would there be? Yes, ma'am.
What's your biggest joy and your biggest regret?
I can tell you there are two big joys in my life, and I've made it known. The first was acquiring the hand of Mrs. Jefferson in marriage. I was fortunate to marry a widow. I knew her first husband. He was a classmate of mine, William and Mary, Bathurst Skelton. They were only married 2 years. He was killed in a carriage accident near Williamsburg. So after the customary widow's seclusion for, 2 years at that time, in fact, she was out before 2 years. I was riding down the Duke of Gloucester Street in Williamsburg. I heard the most melodious sound of a spinet. I recognized the melody. In fact, so did my horse. He took me immediately to that porch. I alighted, went up, and there was the graceful form of the widow Skelton. Well, I knew then she must be coming out of her seclusion. So I made a rap on the door, and the servant girl attended. I asked her if I could accompany her, and she went in, returned to the affirmative. So I ran to my horse satchel, and I snatched my kit. Do you know what a kit is, sir?
Is right next to the kit and caboodle.
I never heard that answer, but I'll accept it. It's a violin. It's a miniature violin. And about that long and half the size of its width. The music masters carry about in their pockets when they go to teach music and dance. And it is what every gentleman ought to realize is its greatest virtue, is portability. You can carry it in your pocket, so it's always ready for those immediate moments of romance. That's the So we had an hour's musicale, and it was certain as we adjourned she had accepted my courtship. You know, the same servant girl, when she handed me my hat, said, "Mr. Jefferson, at the moment you desisted in your accompaniment, I was looking out the window as the widow proceeded, and I saw two gentlemen riding in this direction. The oddest thing occurred. The ears of their horses perked up, took them immediately to the porch. They both jumped off at the same time, ran up onto the porch, ready to knock on the door at the same time, when it was then the music of your kit was heard conjoined with the spinet. And the one looked to the other in disgust. He lowered his hand. He said, "We're too late. Jefferson's gotten here before." That is a true story. It's a true story. It's carried through my family. We were married on the first of the year 1772, though lamentably only 10 years. She produced 6 children, but we could not understand why childbirth compromised her health. She craved sugar more than usual. And our babies weighed heavier to the extent our last child, a little girl, Lucy Elizabeth, weighed 12 pounds. Mrs. Jefferson did not survive, but not before I promised her I could never marry again. And I think you all know I held to that promise. She didn't have to live and suffer as I did. The death of 5 of our 6 children, and I can tell you no more than the complications of a simple fever. Harmony in the marriage state is the first chapter in the book of wisdom. They were 10 years of uncheckered happiness. The second happiest day in my life was when I handed the gavel to Mr. Madison on the 4th of March, 1809, after 8 years of a splendid misery. That's what I wrote. I lost many friends, most of them owners of newspapers. And that's, of course, when I finally came home. But that's exactly what I have written, the 2 happiest days of my life. Ending 40 years in public service. And you know, when I entered the House of Burgesses, 26 years old, I had long red hair. Look what happened after 40 years. Well, citizens, I don't want to belay your time to take leave. You're going to walk out on a most beautiful, beautiful evening in your travels now, and do travel safely. But I hope you will all return. Please do, if only, if only to remember when we were all masked. because truly this is your history. This is the history that you're living. I'm well familiar with it.
What's your 2 cents on that?
My consent, well, this is not the first and it's not going to be the last.
Fair enough.
Oh my heavens, we had to wrap up when we were hit with yellow fever. Our government went into quarantine in the Germantown. We almost lost our Secretary of the Treasury. He came down with yellow fever, but he had it when he was growing up in the Indies, so he survived. But of course, that's many, many years ago, 1793. You don't remember who our Secretary of the Treasury was, do you?
No.
Very good.
What is your biggest, what would be going forward if you, knowing what you know, what you've seen and everything you created and the advances that you had on our nation, if you had the ear of anyone in state politics or just our future, what would
I've written it too, and the lady has asked me what would be my suggestion in our nation moving forward. Well, we've always moved forward.
That's true.
No, as Solomon saith, there's no new thing under the sun. The one advantage we all have is that no one has ever lived in the past. And that also promotes us to recognize that we knew no more what was going to happen on the 22nd of November, 1820, than we did the 22nd of November, 1776. So the lesson of history is to provoke us to wonder, what are they going to say about us centuries from now? But let us never forget and let it still be told we're the first nation in the history of man founded upon principle.
Yes.
Not upon monarchy or royalty, nobility, aristocracy, landed gentry. Principles we continue to work at. It's not going to happen overnight. We turned the world upside down with what we were able to achieve. And to continue to remember that the founding principle was compromise, that we continue to work for more equal and exact justice, that we continue to promote, has always been my interest, education of enlightenment, of appreciation for the past, to know where we've been, to better understand where we are. I think all of this is the greatest impetus to help us to walk into tomorrow. And as we mentioned at the table, a founding principle of our university is not only to be so bold to question everything, but to follow truth wherever it should lead us. Because then you can walk in tomorrow without fear. Why would you have to fear when you're following truth? So that is one of the reasons why, I would say entirely the reason why I enjoy so much more the dreams of our future than perhaps the history of our past. So with that, citizens, I raise a toast to the future with a sigh for our past. All the loves we remember and all our hopes, may they last. And for all of the stories the history books hold, while there is love in our hearts, we shall never grow old.
Love you.
My pleasure. Go in peace.
Thank you, sir.